The conference hall of Summit Heights corporate headquarters buzzed with the energy of 300 executives, all gathered to witness what was supposed to be a routine leadership demonstration. At the center stood Victoria Ashcroft, the powerhouse CEO known as the General, in business circles a woman who had built a billion-dollar logistics empire through decisive command and unshakable authority. Her challenge seemed almost playful when she called out to the maintenance worker quietly, fixing a microphone stand near the stage. "You there care to step in and show us your leadership style?" The room erupted in polite laughter. No one expected the quiet man in work coveralls to accept. No one expected what happened next would crack the foundation of everything Victoria believed about power. But by the end of that night, the woman who never surrendered to anyone would find herself on her knees, not in defeat, but in the most profound moment of respect she'd ever experienced. If you're already hooked, stay close. Because what unfolded next challenged everything the corporate world thought it knew about true leadership. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn sun cast golden light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Summit Heights corporate headquarters, illuminating a conference hall filled with the kind of people who measured success in quarterly earnings and corner offices. 300 executives from across the nation had gathered for the annual Leadership Convergence Summit, and the atmosphere crackled with ambition and expensive cologne. At the center of the polished oak stage stood Victoria Ashcroft, 47 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal power suit that seemed to sharpen every angle of her already formidable presence. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon, and her eyes held the kind of piercing intelligence that made seasoned board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. They called her the General behind her back, sometimes with admiration, often with fear, always with respect. Victoria had earned that nickname through 2 decades of building Ashcroft Global Logistics from a single warehouse operation into a billion-dollar empire spanning 4 continents. She didn't just lead her company, she commanded it with military precision, though she had never worn a uniform. Her leadership philosophy was simple and ruthlessly effective: clear hierarchy, decisive action, absolute authority. It had made her wealthy beyond measure and feared in equal proportion. Today's keynote was titled, "Dominance Through Discipline: The New Leadership Paradigm," and Victoria was in her element. Behind her, a massive screen displayed graphs showing Ashcroft Global's meteoric rise. The audience hung on her every word as she paced the stage like a general addressing troops. "Leadership is not a democracy," Victoria declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall without need for amplification. "It is a chain of command. One vision, one voice, one direction. Consensus is the enemy of progress. Collaboration is code for confusion. True leaders don't ask, they tell." Applause erupted. Phones appeared, capturing her words for social media. Influencers in attendance typed furiously, already crafting posts about Victoria's revolutionary approach to corporate hierarchy. Near the back corner of the stage, almost invisible among the technical equipment and potted plants, a man in maintenance coveralls knelt beside a microphone stand. He worked quietly, his weathered hands adjusting a loose connection with the kind of careful attention most people reserved for precious things. His name was James Smith, 42 years old, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that carried the weight of someone who had seen more of life than most corporate executives could imagine. James had been a facilities manager for Summit Heights for 3 years. Before that, he'd spent 15 years in various industries: project management, operations coordination, team leadership in manufacturing plants and distribution centers. He'd been good at it too, rising through ranks, earning certifications, building teams. But that was before the accident that took his wife. Before he became a single father to his 10-year-old daughter Emma. before he made the choice to trade career advancement for stability and presence in her life. Now, he fixed microphones and changed light bulbs and mopped floors. And he did it without complaint, because it meant he could pick Emma up from school every day at 3:15, help with homework at the kitchen table, and tuck her in every single night. To the executives streaming past him, he was furniture. To Emma, he was the world. Victoria continued her presentation, building toward her grand finale, a live demonstration of her leadership methodology. She gestured toward a complex organizational chart displayed on the screen behind her. True leadership, she said, is about making decisions others are too weak to make. It's about bearing the burden of command without flinching. It requires strength, conviction, and the willingness to stand alone at the top. That's when her eye caught movement near the stage. James, quietly packing up his tools, preparing to slip away unnoticed at an idea sparked in Victoria's mind. Fueled by confidence and perhaps a glass of champagne during the networking session earlier, she had built her reputation on bold moves and unexpected demonstrations. Why not give this audience something memorable? "You there," Victoria called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "The gentleman with the toolbox." The conference hall fell silent. 300 pairs of eyes swiveled toward James, who looked up slowly, his expression calm but guarded. "Yes, you," Victoria said with a smile that was both charming and challenging. "Come here for a moment." James hesitated, his hand still on his toolbox. He could feel the weight of all those stares, the curiosity mixed with amusement. This wasn't the first time someone in a suit had decided to make him part of their presentation. Usually, it involved some condescending point about every role matters or the backbone of our organization. But Emma's voice echoed in his mind from that morning. "You're the bravest person I know." "Dad," she'd said it while he tied her shoelaces, preparing her for another day at Brookfield Elementary. If his daughter thought he was brave, he could handle whatever this was. James stood, set down his toolbox carefully, and walked onto the stage with quiet dignity. He didn't hurry, didn't shuffle. He simply walked like a man comfortable in his own skin. Regardless of who was watching, Victoria extended her hand, and James shook it. Her grip was firm, competitive. His was steady, unhurried. "What's your name?" Victoria asked, her microphone catching every word. "James Smith, ma'am. And what do you do here, James?" "Facilities maintenance." "Perfect," Victoria said, turning to address the audience. "James here represents something we often overlook in leadership discussions, the ground level, the foundation upon which all our grand strategies rest." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. James remained still, his face neutral. He'd heard variations of this speech before, but Victoria wasn't finished. "James, I'm going to propose something unusual. For the next 15 minutes, I want you to lead this room. Not me, you. I'll step aside, and you tell these 300 executives how they should run their companies." Nervous laughter spread through the audience. This was entertainment now, a moment of levity before the serious sessions resumed. The maintenance man playing CEO, how delightful, how humanizing. Victoria's executive assistant, a sharp woman named Chloe Martinez, shifted uncomfortably in the front row. She'd worked with Victoria long enough to recognize when her boss was about to create either a brilliant moment or a public relations disaster. James looked at Victoria, then at the sea of expectant faces. He could walk away. He could politely decline, return to his toolbox, finish his shift, and pick up Emma on time. That would be the safe choice, the invisible choice. But something in Victoria's eyes stopped him, not the challenge, but something deeper. She was testing him, yes, but she was also testing something in herself, though she probably didn't realize it yet. "All right," James said quietly. "I'll do it." The audience stirred, phones lifting higher. This was getting interesting. Victoria gestured grandly to the center of the stage, her smile confident. She stepped aside, ceding the spotlight with the ease of someone certain she could reclaim it whenever she wished. James walked to the microphone, and the room fell silent again, waiting for the inevitable stumbling, the awkward jokes, the self-deprecating humor that would confirm what they all assumed, that leadership was the domain of those born or trained for it, not maintenance workers in coveralls. But when James spoke, his voice was clear and steady, carrying the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Leadership, he began, isn't about standing above people. It's about standing among them. And in that moment, something shifted in the conference hall of Summit Heights corporate headquarters. The laughter died. The smirks faded. 300 executives leaned forward slightly, their attention caught by something unexpected, not a performance, but the truth spoken simply by someone who had nothing to prove and everything to give. Victoria's smile wavered just slightly, like the first crack in ice before the thaw. James stood at the microphone, his work boots planted firmly on the stage that moments ago had belonged to Victoria Ashcroft. The contrast was impossible to ignore: her designer suit versus his faded coveralls, her perfectly styled hair versus his simple, practical cut, her aura of calculated command versus his unhurried presence. The audience waited, poised between curiosity and skepticism. Some executives had already pulled out their phones, ready to capture what they assumed would be an awkward but endearing moment. Others exchanged knowing glances, prepared to indulge this bit of corporate theater before returning to the real business of leadership. James took a breath, his eyes scanning the room not with judgment, but with recognition. He saw the exhaustion hidden behind expensive glasses, the stress masked by confident postures, the loneliness that came from climbing ladders where each rung meant leaving someone behind. "I'm not going to tell you how to run your companies," James said, his voice calm and measured. "You're all clearly successful at what you do, or you wouldn't be here. But I will share what I've learned about leadership from a different vantage point. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Victoria stood to the side, arms crossed, her expression one of amused tolerance. She'd given him the stage as a demonstration, let the common worker speak. Then she'd synthesize his simple wisdom into her more sophisticated framework. It was a neat trick she'd used before, showing that she valued all voices while ultimately reinforcing that some voices carried more weight than others. "I used to manage teams in manufacturing," James continued. 50, sometimes 100 people working complex assembly lines. The metrics were ruthless productivity, efficiency, error rates. My bosses wanted numbers, and I delivered them. I was good at it. A few executives nodded. This was familiar territory. "But I measured success wrong," James said. "I measured it in output per hour, in quarterly performance reviews, in how quickly I could identify and remove underperformers. I thought leadership meant optimizing systems and enforcing standards." He paused, his hands resting lightly on the podium. "Then my wife died in a car accident, and I became a single father overnight. My daughter was 2 years old. And suddenly, every framework I built my career on collapsed." The room grew quieter. This wasn't the light-hearted anecdote they'd expected. "I had a choice," James said. "Keep climbing, keep optimizing, keep commanding, and hire people to raise my daughter while I pursued what I'd been taught to call success. Or step back, step down, and be present for the one person who needed me more than any quarterly target ever would." Victoria's expression shifted slightly. Something about his words had found an unexpected target. "I chose her," James continued. "I took this job, facilities maintenance at Summit Heights, because it pays enough to cover rent and food, and it ends at 5 o'clock every day. It doesn't challenge my ego or feed my ambition. What it does is let me pick my daughter up from school, make her dinner, help with homework, and tuck her in every single night." He looked directly at Victoria now, his gaze steady. "You asked me to lead this room for 15 minutes. Here's what I'd say. Leadership isn't about hierarchy or command. It's about service. It's about understanding that the people you lead aren't resources to be optimized. They're human beings with families, fears, dreams, and limitations." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward with genuine interest. "When I led teams before," James said, "I never asked my people about their lives outside work. I never considered that the woman showing up late might have a sick parent, or that the man with declining performance might be going through a divorce. I just saw numbers dropping and made personnel decisions accordingly." His voice remained gentle, but it carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Real leadership means recognizing that you can't command people into excellence. You can only invite them. You can't dominate your way to genuine loyalty. You earn it by showing up, by listening, by making the people you lead feel seen. Victoria's jaw tightened. This wasn't the simple folksy wisdom she'd expected. This was a fundamental challenge to everything her empire was built on. Before she could interrupt, the doors at the back of the conference hall opened. A man strode forward, Derek Castellan, the famous leadership consultant whose programs cost 6 figures and whose client list included Fortune 100 CEOs. He was scheduled to speak later, but apparently he'd heard enough. "Excuse me," Derek announced, his voice booming with professional confidence. "This is touching, truly, but let's be honest about what we're witnessing here." He walked onto the stage, commanding attention with the ease of someone who'd spent 30 years teaching executives how to project authority. "What James is describing isn't leadership, it's abdication," Derek said, addressing the audience rather than James. He stepped down from a management role to take a maintenance job. That's not a leadership philosophy, that's retreat. It's admirable in a personal sense, perhaps, but it has nothing to do with running organizations, meeting shareholder expectations, or competing in global markets. Applause erupted from a section of the audience. Many executives nodded in agreement. This was the narrative they understood. Success required sacrifice, leadership required toughness, and sentiment was the enemy of results. James didn't argue. He simply stood there, listening with the kind of patience that came from years of being underestimated. Derek continued, warming to his theme. "True leadership requires making hard decisions without being paralyzed by emotion. It requires maintaining boundaries between professional and personal. It requires being able to look your team in the eye and tell them the truth." James interrupted quietly. "Even when the truth is that you don't have all the answers." Derek's smile thinned. "And what would you know about leading teams through crisis? Through market disruptions? Through hostile takeovers and board challenges?" "Not much," James admitted. "But I know what it's like to lead one person through the hardest time of her life. And I've learned that the principles are the same whether you're leading 1 or 1,000. He turned back to the audience. "Every person you lead is someone's whole world. They're someone's parent, someone's partner, someone's reason for getting up in the morning. When you treat them as disposable resources, you're not just affecting quarterly numbers, you're affecting lives." Derek laughed, a sharp bark of dismissal. "This is exactly the kind of soft thinking that destroys competitive advantage. You want to coddle people? Go work in human resources. You want to lead? You make the tough calls." "I agree," James said calmly. "Leadership requires tough calls. The toughest call I ever made was choosing to be present for my daughter instead of climbing a corporate ladder. It cost me career advancement, social status, and financial security. But it gave her a father who's actually there." The room had gone completely silent now. Even those who disagreed with James found themselves listening. "You asked what I know about crisis," James continued, looking at Derek. "I know that when everything falls apart, people don't remember your strategic plans or your quarterly results. They remember whether you saw them as human beings or as tools for your success. Victoria stepped forward, reclaiming the stage. Her expression was harder now, the polite indulgence replaced by something sharper. "This has been enlightening," she said, her voice carrying an edge. "But let's ground ourselves in reality. James, you're describing a philosophy that works for small-scale, personal decisions. It doesn't scale. Running a billion-dollar company requires different principles than raising one person." James met her gaze. "Does it? Or have we just convinced ourselves it does? It's easier to treat people as numbers than as individuals." The challenge hung in the air between them. Victoria's eyes flashed. For 20 years, she'd built her empire on the principle that leadership meant strength through hierarchy, control through clarity of command. And here was a maintenance worker suggesting that everything she'd built was fundamentally flawed. "Prove it," Victoria said suddenly. Not with words, with action. She gestured to the audience. "These 300 executives are facing real challenges right now. Market volatility, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, technological disruption. Tell me, with your philosophy of service and presence, how would you lead them through that?" James was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he did something unexpected. He walked down from the stage and into the audience. The executive stirred as he approached a woman in the third row, Abigail Anderson, CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing firm. "What's your biggest challenge right now?" James asked her directly. Abigail blinked, surprised at being called on. "Retention," she said after a moment. "I'm losing key people to competitors, and I can't figure out why. We pay well, offer good benefits. Have you asked them why they're leaving?" James asked. "Exit interviews, yes. No, I mean really asked. Not in a formal meeting with HR present, but actually sat down with them as human beings and listened to what's happening in their lives." Abigail hesitated. "We have processes for that." "Processes aren't the same as presence," James said gently. "People leave jobs when they feel invisible, when they're treated as replaceable, when their struggles outside work are seen as inconveniences rather than realities." He moved to another executive, a man near the back. "What keeps you up at night?" The man, Samuel Thompson, a tech company founder, laughed uncomfortably. "Right now? Wondering if I can meet payroll next quarter if our funding round falls through. Have you told your team about the uncertainty?" James asked. "God, no. That would destroy morale. Or it would give them the chance to problem solve with you," James countered. "People can handle truth. What they can't handle is being kept in the dark and then blindsided." Victoria watched from the stage, her arms crossed. The audience was completely engaged now, leaning forward. Some even volunteering their own challenges without being asked. James spent 10 minutes moving through the crowd, asking questions, listening to answers, offering not solutions, but perspective. He didn't claim to have all the answers. He simply reminded them that behind every business challenge was a human reality. When he returned to the stage, the energy in the room had shifted. It was subtle but unmistakable, like the difference between a lecture hall and a conversation. "Leadership isn't about having power over people," James said, his voice carrying to every corner. "It's about having responsibility for them. And that responsibility doesn't end when the workday does. It means caring about whether they can afford rent, whether their families are healthy, whether they feel valued." Derek Castellan stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're describing a fantasy world where business leaders can be therapists and friends and still compete in ruthless markets." "I'm describing the world we already live in," James replied. "We just pretend we don't because it's easier to treat leadership as a transaction rather than a relationship." Victoria stepped forward again, her face unreadable. The woman who had started this demonstration with such confidence now looked like someone whose foundation had been shaken. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice controlled. "That was unexpected." The audience erupted in applause, not the polite clapping from before, but something deeper, more genuine. Some executives stood. Phones captured the moment, but not with mockery now. With something closer to reverence. James nodded simply and walked off the stage, returning to his toolbox in the corner. But as he bent to pick it up, Victoria's voice stopped him. "Wait." He turned. Victoria stood at the edge of the stage, looking at him with an expression that was part confusion, part something else, respect, maybe, or recognition. "How did you do that?" she asked quietly, her microphone off now, the question personal rather than performative. "Do what?" "Make them listen. Make them care. I've been speaking to audiences like this for 20 years, and I've never seen that kind of response." James picked up his toolbox. "You commanded their attention, Ms. Ashcroft. I just respected their humanity." He walked toward the exit, leaving Victoria standing alone on the stage she'd built her empire upon, wondering for the first time if she'd been building it on the wrong foundation all along. The conference hall slowly emptied as executives filed out for the scheduled networking lunch. But the energy had changed. Instead of the usual posturing and business card exchanges, people gathered in small clusters, their conversations unusually earnest. James Smith's 15 minutes had cracked something open, a hunger for leadership that felt less like performance and more like truth. James didn't witness any of it. He'd already left through the service entrance, his toolbox in hand, his mind already shifting to the afternoon's tasks. He had 2 more floors to cover before his shift ended. And then the 20-minute bus ride to Brookfield Elementary to pick up Emma, the conference, the stage. Victoria Ashcroft, all of it was already fading into the background of a life built around simpler, more essential things. But the world wasn't done with him yet. In the executive lounge on the 42nd floor, Victoria Ashcroft sat across from her director of communications, a razor-sharp strategist named Nadira Queleth. Between them, a laptop displayed social media feeds that had exploded in the last 30 minutes. The hashtag Real Leadership was trending. Video clips from the conference captured on dozens of phones were spreading across platforms. But they weren't clips of Victoria's keynote. They were clips of James speaking quietly to executives in the audience, his words about humanity and presence cutting through years of corporate conditioning. "This is a problem," Nadira said, scrolling through comments. "People are contrasting him with you. Some are calling your approach outdated and dehumanizing." Victoria's jaw tightened. "He's a maintenance worker who gave a nice talk. This will blow over." "Not if we don't control the narrative," Nadira countered. She opened a folder on the laptop, revealing a rough cut of the conference footage. "I've been working with the video team. We can edit this to reframe the context." On screen, a new version of events played out. The opening showed Victoria's powerful keynote in full. James's segment was reduced to sound bites, his words recontextualized with overlays, suggesting he was sharing ground-level perspective that Victoria had wisely incorporated into her broader framework. The emotional moments, James talking about his wife's death, his choice to prioritize his daughter, were cut entirely. Too raw, too sympathetic. The closing shot showed Victoria nodding approvingly, as if James had been part of her planned demonstration all along. "We position it as you showcasing inclusive leadership," Nadira explained. "You gave a platform to an everyday worker, demonstrating that your philosophy makes room for all voices. Then we move on." Victoria stared at the screen. The edit was clean, professional, perfectly designed to protect her brand. It was exactly what she would have approved without hesitation a week ago, but something nagged at her. The way James had looked at her when he said, "You commanded their attention, I just respected their humanity." It had landed like an arrow in a place she didn't know was vulnerable. "Do it," Victoria said finally. "But keep the original footage archived." "Why?" "Just do it." By evening, Ashcroft Global's official channels had posted the edited version. The title read, Victoria Ashcroft demonstrates inclusive leadership by elevating all voices. Within hours, it had thousands of views, most from corporate accounts and leadership development organizations, praising Victoria's innovative approach. But the organic videos, the raw, unedited clips captured on phones, continued spreading. And people noticed the differences. James knew nothing about any of this. He sat at his small kitchen table in their apartment in Maplewood Heights, a modest complex where the elevator worked half the time and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors' conversations. Emma was across from him, her homework spread out, chewing on a pencil as she worked through multiplication tables. "Dad, what's 8 times 7? She asked. "What do you think it is?" She scrunched her face, counting silently. 56? "That's right. You're getting faster." Emma beamed, then returned to her worksheet. James watched her, this fierce little person who had become his entire world. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's determination. Every day she grew a little more independent, a little more herself, and every day James felt the weight and privilege of witnessing it. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally he checked. Dozens of messages from former colleagues, people he hadn't spoken to in years. LinkedIn notifications. Facebook tags. Someone had found his old professional profiles and connected them to the conference videos. One message stood out. From his former supervisor at the manufacturing plant where he'd worked before Emma was born. "Saw you trending." That was powerful stuff. "Why didn't you ever talk like that when you worked here?" James stared at the message. The answer was simple. He hadn't learned it yet. The old James had been too busy optimizing systems to see the people within them. It had taken loss, grief, and the responsibility of single parenthood to teach him what leadership actually meant. He put the phone down without responding, across the city. In a sleek apartment overlooking the financial district, investigative journalist Hannah Clark sat in her home office, surrounded by monitors displaying different angles of the Summit Heights conference. Hannah had built her reputation on exposing corporate malfeasance, on finding the stories that powerful people wanted buried. She'd been at the Leadership Convergence Summit covering a different story, a rumored scandal involving one of the keynote speakers when James Smith's unexpected moment had unfolded. Now she was investigating something else entirely. Hannah had obtained both versions of the footage, the organic phone videos and Ashcroft Global's edited release. She'd spent hours comparing them, noting every cut, every reframing, every subtle manipulation. The edit was sophisticated, but it was unmistakably designed to diminish James's impact while protecting Victoria's brand. More interesting was what Hannah had uncovered about James himself. Public records showed his employment history, his credentials, his sudden career shift 3 years ago. She'd found his late wife's obituary, the accident report. She'd tracked down former colleagues willing to speak on background. James was one of the best operations managers I'd ever worked with, one had told her. Brilliant at systems thinking, could solve problems others couldn't see. But he was also ruthless about performance metrics. If you couldn't keep up, you were out. Then his wife died, and he just disappeared. Hannah had pressed for more. Disappeared how? He finished his current projects, trained his replacements, and resigned. Said he was done with that kind of work. We thought he'd burned out or had a breakdown. Nobody expected him to end up fixing microphones. Hannah leaned back in her chair, the pieces assembling. James Smith wasn't a simple maintenance worker who got lucky with a viral moment. He was someone who had deliberately walked away from success, someone who had chosen a different definition of what mattered. And now Victoria Ashcroft's PR machine was trying to absorb and neutralize his message. She opened a new document and began typing. The leader they're trying to erase. How corporate power rewrites inconvenient truths. At Summit Heights, the night cleaning crew worked through the empty conference hall. The stage was being dismantled, the chairs stacked, the remnants of the Leadership Convergence Summit packed away. In the maintenance office, James changed out of his coveralls and into street clothes. Ready to head home. His supervisor, a gruff man named Anthony White, who'd never said more than 10 words to him, appeared in the doorway. "You're blowing up online," Anthony said. "Yeah, I noticed. Corporate's asking questions about you. Background checks, employment history. They want to know who you are." James pulled on his jacket. "I'm just the guy who fixes things." Anthony studied him. "You know they're going to come after you, right? Big companies don't like people who make them look bad, even accidentally. I didn't make anyone look bad. I just answered questions honestly. That's exactly what makes you dangerous to them." James picked up his backpack. "I'll deal with it if it comes. Right now, I need to get home to my daughter." But as he walked through the empty lobby toward the exit, he felt the shift. Invisibility had been his shield for 3 years, protecting him and Emma from scrutiny, from expectations, from the pressure to be anything other than present. That shield had cracked. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. A voicemail from someone claiming to be a producer at a morning talk show, wanting to book him for an appearance. Then another from a podcast host. Then a literary agent asking if he'd consider writing a book about leadership. James deleted them all without listening to the full messages. Outside, the evening air was cool. He walked to the bus stop, where a handful of other workers waited. Security guards ending their shifts, custodians heading home. People whose labor kept the city running while remaining largely invisible to those who benefited from it. One of them, a woman James recognized from the building, looked up from her phone. "Hey, aren't you the guy from the video? The one who talked about real leadership?" James hesitated, then nodded. "That was beautiful," she said. "My supervisor made everyone on our team watch it. First time I've seen him actually listen to something about treating people right." Others at the bus stop turned, recognition dawning. Suddenly James wasn't invisible anymore, not even here, among his peers. The bus arrived, and James climbed on, finding a seat near the back. Through the window, he watched the city pass towers of glass and steel housing empires, built on quarterly earnings and competitive advantage. Monuments to the kind of leadership he'd once practiced and now questioned. He thought about Victoria Ashcroft, standing on that stage, confident in her command. He thought about the executives in that audience, many of them probably good people trapped in systems that rewarded the wrong things. He thought about Emma, waiting for him, whose entire understanding of leadership came from watching her father choose presence over prestige day after day. Bus rolled through neighborhoods where leadership looked different. Community organizers fighting for better schools, single parents working multiple jobs to keep families housed, volunteers serving meals to those who had nothing. Real leadership, James had learned, wasn't about the stage or the spotlight. It was about showing up for the people who depended on you, especially when no one was watching. But now people were watching. And James had a sinking feeling that his choice to speak truth to that room full of executives had set something in motion that he couldn't control. His phone buzzed one more time. Against his better judgment, he checked it. The message was from Victoria Ashcroft herself, sent through LinkedIn. "We need to talk. There's going to be a response to what happened today. You should be prepared." James stared at the message as the bus carried him toward home, toward Emma, toward the life he'd built in the margins. He didn't respond. Not yet, because he knew what Victoria didn't, that he'd already lost everything once. And it had taught him that the only things worth protecting were the things that couldn't be taken by corporate maneuvering or public opinion. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed living. And tomorrow, he'd wake up, make Emma breakfast, drop her at school, and return to Summit Heights to fix whatever needed fixing, same as always. The world could trend or spin or debate. James Smith would keep being exactly who he'd fought so hard to become, a present father. An honest man, and someone who understood that the most radical act of leadership was simply treating people like they mattered. Even if the cost of that truth was the end of invisibility. Morning after the Leadership Convergence Summit. James woke at 5:30 as always, the apartment still dark and quiet. He moved through his routine with practiced efficiency, coffee brewing, Emma's lunch packed, her school clothes laid out on the chair beside her bed. By 6:15, he was showered and dressed in his work coveralls, ready for another shift at Summit Heights. Emma shuffled into the kitchen at 6:30, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hair stuck up in directions that defied physics, and she wore her favorite pajamas covered in cartoon planets. "Morning, kiddo," James said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her. "Morning, Dad," she yawned, then noticed his phone on the counter, screen lighting up repeatedly with notifications. "Why is your phone doing that?" "Just some work stuff. Nothing important." But it was important, and James knew it. His phone had been buzzing since he'd woken up. Messages, emails, calls from numbers he didn't recognize. The video clips from yesterday had gone fully viral overnight. News outlets were picking up the story. Corporate leadership blogs were analyzing his words. Someone had created a compilation video titled "Maintenance Worker Teaches Billionaire CEO What Leadership Really Means" that had 3 million views. He silenced his phone and focused on Emma, helping her through breakfast and morning cartoons, getting her ready for school. This time with her was sacred, and he refused to let the digital chaos intrude. At 7:45, they walked hand in hand to the bus stop for Brookfield Elementary. The October morning was crisp, leaves turning gold and red on the trees lining their street in Maplewood Heights. Emma chattered about a science project on ecosystems, and James listened with full attention, asking questions, encouraging her thinking. When the bus arrived, Emma hugged him tight. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Em. Have a great day." He watched the bus pull away, then checked his phone. 73 new notifications. He scrolled through them quickly. Most were congratulatory messages, interview requests, speaking invitations. But one stood out, an email with the subject line, "Leadership Excellence Forum, Special Invitation." James opened it. The message was from someone named Kenneth Dromer, Events Director for the National Leadership Excellence Association. The email was professionally courteous, but carried an undertone of urgency. "Mr. Smith, your impromptu presentation at yesterday's summit has generated significant interest in the leadership community. We would like to extend a special invitation for you to participate in our annual Leadership Excellence Forum next month as a featured speaker. This is a prestigious platform that has hosted some of the world's most influential business leaders. We believe your perspective would provide valuable contrast to traditional leadership paradigms. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss details and compensation." James deleted it without responding. He arrived at Summit Heights at 8:20, entering through the service entrance as always. But something was different. The security guard at the desk, a man named Ryan Robinson, who usually just nodded him through, actually stood up. "James, hey, I need you to sign in today." "New protocol. I've been signing in for 3 years." "I know, but now you need to sign the visitor log too. And they want to see you in HR before you start your shift." James felt the first real stirring of unease. "Why?" Ryan lowered his voice. "There's been some noise about yesterday. Corporate wants to make sure everything's documented properly." The Human Resources office was on the 10th floor, a place James had only visited once when he was hired. The director, a woman in her 50s named Evelyn Thomas, greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Smith, thank you for coming up. Please, have a seat." James sat across from her desk, which was meticulously organized with color-coded files and a nameplate that reflected the fluorescent lighting. that reflected the fluorescent lighting. "I'll be direct," Evelyn said, folding her hands on the desk. "Your participation in yesterday's conference has created some complications. We've received multiple media inquiries asking about your employment here, your background, your credentials. Corporate is concerned about liability. Liability for what? You presented yourself as representing a certain perspective on leadership while wearing our uniform on our premises during a company-hosted event. That creates potential implications for how your words might be interpreted as reflecting Summit Heights' institutional positions." James kept his voice calm. "I was fixing a microphone. Ms. Ashcroft invited me to speak. I didn't claim to represent anyone but myself. Nevertheless, the optics are complicated." Evelyn pulled out a document. "We'd like you to sign this. It's a standard statement, clarifying that your views were personal and don't reflect Summit Heights management philosophy or practices." James read through it. The language was careful, legal, designed to create distance between him and the company. Signing it wouldn't cost him anything tangible, but it would reinforce the narrative that his words were just one man's opinion, easily compartmentalized and dismissed. "What if I don't sign?" Evelyn's smile tightened. "Then we'd need to have a different conversation about whether your continued employment here is appropriate given the media attention and potential disruption to our corporate relationships." There it was, the gentle threat wrapped in HR professionalism. Sign the paper and stay invisible, or refuse and lose the job that let him be present for Emma. James set the document down unsigned. "I need to think about it. Can I have until end of day?" Evelyn's expression suggested this wasn't the answer she wanted, but she nodded. "End of business today. 5 o'clock. James returned to the maintenance office, his mind churning. His supervisor Anthony was waiting, arms crossed. "They're squeezing you," Anthony said flatly. "I've seen this before. Company gets embarrassed. They find ways to make the problem disappear. I'm not trying to be a problem. Doesn't matter. You became one anyway." Anthony pulled out his phone, showing James a news article. The headline read, "Viral maintenance worker challenges corporate leadership orthodoxy. Who is James Smith?" The article included his employment history, his credentials, speculation about why he'd left management. Some of it was accurate, some exaggerated. None of it was something James had consented to sharing. "They're digging into your life," Anthony said. "And corporations don't like employees who become stories. Stories are unpredictable." James spent the morning working his usual rounds, but he felt the difference everywhere. Executives who normally didn't see him now stared. Some smiled encouragingly. A few approached asking for advice. Others looked uncomfortable, as if his presence reminded them of something they'd rather forget. At lunch, he sat in the maintenance break room, eating the sandwich he'd packed. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "This is Hannah Clark, investigative journalist. I'm writing about what happened at the summit and how Ashcroft Global is trying to control the narrative. I'd like to talk to you. What they're doing isn't right." James stared at the message. He recognized Hannah's name from her byline on corporate exposes. She had a reputation for taking down powerful people who abused their positions. But inviting a journalist into his life meant inviting scrutiny into Emma's life too. He didn't respond. At 2 o'clock. Another email arrived, this one from Victoria Ashcroft's office. The subject line, "Leadership Excellence Forum, Special Announcement." James opened it reluctantly. The message was brief. "Dear colleagues and leadership community members, we are pleased to announce that the Leadership Excellence Forum, scheduled for November 15th, will feature a special debate-style presentation. Traditional versus transformative leadership. Confirmed participants include Victoria Ashcroft and James Smith. This promises to be a groundbreaking dialogue about the future of organizational leadership. Registration opens Monday." James's stomach dropped. He hadn't agreed to anything. This was manipulation disguised as invitation. Announce it publicly. Create expectations. Make refusal look like cowardice or disrespect. He immediately called the number listed in the original invitation email. Kenneth Dromer answered on the second ring. Mr. Smith, thank you for calling. I assume you've seen our announcement? I never agreed to participate. Well, Ms. Ashcroft was quite insistent that you'd be interested. Given the response to your summit appearance, we thought, you thought wrong. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a leadership expert. I'm a maintenance worker who answered some questions. Kenneth's voice cooled. Mr. Smith, this is a significant opportunity. The forum reaches hundreds of thousands of business leaders globally. Your message about human-centered leadership could have tremendous impact. Or it could be used to make me look foolish next to someone with 20 years of experience and a billion-dollar company. I assure you, the format would be balanced and respectful. I didn't ask for balance or respect. I asked not to be volunteered for something without my consent. There was a pause. I'm afraid the announcement has already gone out. If you withdraw now, it would create significant complications. The media narrative would be that you backed down when challenged directly. James closed his eyes. This was the trap. Refuse and be painted as afraid. Participate and be set up as the fool who thought 15 minutes of viral fame made him qualified to debate a CEO. I'll think about it, James said finally. But in the future, don't announce my participation in anything without asking me first. He hung up before Kenneth could respond. The afternoon dragged. James worked mechanically, replacing light bulbs, fixing a jammed door, clearing a clogged drain. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating options, measuring risks. Every choice seemed to lead somewhere he didn't want to go. At 4:30, his phone rang. Victoria Ashcroft's name appeared on the screen. James almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello. James, it's Victoria. We need to talk in person. Are you still at Summit Heights? I'm working until 5. Can you come to the executive lounge? 42nd floor. This is important. Something in her voice was different from yesterday's confident command. There was an edge of urgency, maybe even concern. I'll be there in 10 minutes, James said. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor. His coveralls and tool belt starkly out of place in the marble and mahogany luxury. The executive lounge was empty except for Victoria, who stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She turned as he entered. Without her stage presence and audience, she looked smaller somehow, more human, tired. Thank you for coming, she said. I imagine you've had quite a day. You could say that. Victoria gestured to a leather chair. James sat, and she took the seat across from him, not behind the power position of a desk, but face to face. I didn't authorize that forum announcement, she said. My publicist and their events team coordinated it without consulting me. When I found out, I called them immediately, and they said it was already generating massive registration interest. Pulling back now would damage both our reputations. She met his eyes. I'm sorry. This isn't how I intended things to go. James studied her, trying to read sincerity through layers of corporate polish. What did you intend? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Yesterday, when I called you on stage, I intended to make a point about inclusive leadership while maintaining clear hierarchy. A nice moment, then move on. But you said something that's been haunting me. What? That I commanded attention while you respected humanity. She looked down at her hands. I've been thinking about that all night. About whether I've built an empire by commanding people instead of seeing them. You're successful by any measure, James said carefully. Your company employs thousands, generates billions. That's not nothing. But at what cost? Victoria's voice dropped. I have 3 ex-husbands, 2 estranged adult daughters, and a corner office that feels more like a monument than a home. I optimized everything for success and woke up realizing I don't know what success actually means anymore. James felt unexpected sympathy. Then why go through with the forum? Because I need to understand what you understand. How you walked away from career advancement and don't seem haunted by it. How you can work a job people consider beneath your capabilities and radiate more contentment than I've felt in 20 years of winning. It's not complicated, James said. I chose what mattered most and built my life around it. Everything else became background noise. But how do you silence the noise? The ambition, the comparison, the fear of being forgotten? James thought of Emma, of tucking her in last night, of her sleepy smile as she said she loved him. You replace it with something louder. Love is louder than ambition if you let it be. Victoria's eyes glistened. For a moment, the armor cracked completely. I don't think I know how to do that anymore. Then maybe you start by asking yourself who you want to be present for and why. They sat in silence for a long moment. Two people from completely different worlds finding unexpected common ground in questioning what they'd each built their lives around. Finally, Victoria spoke. The forum, if we're going to do it, let's make it real. Not a debate where one of us wins. A conversation about what leadership costs and whether we're paying the right price. James considered. And if I say no? Then I'll withdraw too and deal with the fallout. But I think you have something people need to hear. Even if it's uncomfortable. James thought about Emma asking him why his name was on posters. About the woman at the bus stop saying his words had made her supervisor listen. About all the people trapped in systems that valued the wrong things. I'll do it, he said. But on one condition, my daughter comes first. If something happens with her, if she needs me, I walk away without explanation and without apology. Victoria extended her hand. Deal. They shook, and James left the executive lounge feeling like he'd just agreed to something that would change everything. For better or worse. When he picked up Emma at 5:15. She bounced into his arms, chattering about her science project. He held her tight, breathing in the simple truth of her presence, storing it against whatever storm was coming, because the world had decided James Smith had a message, whether he wanted to deliver it or not. And now he had to figure out how to protect what mattered while speaking truth to people who'd built empires on avoiding it. Hannah Clark sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from Summit Heights. Her laptop opened to multiple browser tabs, each containing a different piece of James Smith's puzzle. She'd been investigating for 18 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the journalist's instinct that this story was bigger than a viral moment. The public records painted a clear picture. James Alexander Smith, born in Thornfield 42 years ago, bachelor's degree in operations management from State University, MBA completed part-time while working. His employment history showed steady progression: production supervisor at Kellerman Manufacturing, operations manager at Westbrook Distribution, senior logistics coordinator at Harmon Industrial Supply. Then, 3 years ago, nothing. A gap that coincided exactly with the death of his wife. Hannah had found the accident report. Sarah Catherine Smith, 36, died when a truck ran a red light at the intersection of Oak and 15th Street. The police report noted that she died instantly, that the driver had been texting, that Sarah had been on her way home from picking up groceries. She left behind a husband and a daughter, Emma Gray Smith, age 7 at the time. What Hannah couldn't find in public records, she'd pieced together through interviews. She'd tracked down James's former colleagues, his old supervisors, people who'd worked under him. The picture that emerged was complicated. James was brilliant, said his former supervisor at Westbrook, a man named Thomas Kellerman, who now ran his own consulting firm. He could see inefficiencies others missed, design systems that cut costs by 20–30%. But he was also ruthless about performance. If you couldn't meet the metrics, you were gone. He didn't yell or berate, which almost made it worse. He just explained very calmly why your position was being eliminated. Another former colleague, a woman who'd worked in HR at Harman Industrial, offered a different perspective. James ran the tightest operation in the company. Everything optimized, everything measured. But people burned out fast on his teams. The turnover was brutal. He'd say, if they can't handle the pace, they're in the wrong job. Looking back, I think he was running from something even then, trying to prove something to himself. Hannah found James's performance reviews from that period. They were glowing, exceptional strategic thinking, delivers results consistently, strong leadership presence. But there were notes in the margins too. Feedback from 360-degree reviews where his direct reports had anonymously shared concerns. Doesn't seem to see us as people. Just resources, no work-life balance. Feel like numbers on a spreadsheet. The James Smith from 3 years ago bore almost no resemblance to the man who had spoken with such quiet wisdom at the summit. What changed him? Hannah tracked down someone who'd known Sarah, a woman named Grace Harris who'd been Sarah's colleague at the nonprofit where she'd worked as a program coordinator. They met for coffee, and Grace painted a picture of a marriage under strain. Sarah loved James, Grace said carefully, but she struggled with his work obsession. He'd miss dinners, cancel plans, work weekends. She understood ambition, but she felt like she was raising Emma alone even when James was home, because mentally he was always at work. Did she ever talk about leaving him? Grace shook her head. No, never. She believed he'd eventually realize what mattered. She used to say, he's a good man trapped in a bad system, and someday he'll see it. She was patient, hopeful. She thought they had time. But time ran out on a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah's car was in the wrong place at the wrong second. When someone's text message mattered more than watching the road, Hannah found the funeral notice. Small service, family only. But she also found something else, a eulogy that had been posted on a memorial website written by James himself. The words were raw, stripped of the professional polish she'd seen in his corporate communications. Sarah saw who I could be before I did. She loved me through my worst self, waiting for my best self to emerge. I wasted years chasing things that don't matter, and now she's gone and I can't get those years back. All I have left is the promise I made at her graveside, to be for our daughter what I failed to be for my wife, present, fully here. Done with the optimization of everything except my capacity to love the person who needs me most. Hannah sat back, tears blurring her vision. This wasn't a story about a maintenance worker going viral. This was a story about transformation through devastating loss, about a man who had to lose everything to understand what mattered. She dug deeper, finding the timeline of James's exit from corporate life. He'd finished his current projects at Harman Industrial, ensuring smooth transitions. He'd refused severance beyond what was legally required, didn't fight for his stock options, didn't negotiate. He just left, taking the facilities position at a smaller company where the hours were predictable and the work ended when the shift did. One of his former direct reports, a man named Michael Miller, who now ran operations at a competing firm, shared a memory that crystallized everything. About a month after Sarah died, James called a team meeting. We thought it was about quarterly targets. Instead, he apologized. He said, I've managed you like your machines, and I'm sorry. You have families, lives, dreams I never asked about. I optimized you for productivity and forgot you're human beings. Then he told us he was leaving. Some people thought he'd had a breakdown. Now I wonder if he'd actually broken through. Hannah compiled everything into a draft article, but something held her back from publishing. The story was powerful, but it felt incomplete. She needed to understand not just who James had been, but who he was now. She decided to take a risk. That evening, Hannah waited outside Brookfield Elementary. She'd learned James's routine. He picked Emma up at 3:15 every day. Never late, never delegated it to anyone else. At 3:12, she saw him walking toward the school, hands in his jacket pockets, his pace unhurried. "Mr. Smith," she called out. James turned, recognizing her from the messages she'd sent. His expression didn't change, but his body language shifted, slightly protective, wary. "Miss Clark," the journalist. "I've been researching your story," Hannah said. "I know about Sarah, about your career before, about the transformation." James's jaw tightened. "That's not a story. That's my life." "Exactly. And right now, Victoria Ashcroft's team is trying to reduce it to a viral moment that can be managed and forgotten. But what you represent is bigger than that. I don't represent anything. I'm just a father trying to raise his daughter right." Emma emerged from the school then, backpack bouncing, face bright. She ran to James, who scooped her up with easy affection. "Dad, can Mia come over this weekend? We want to work on our ecosystem project together. We'll talk about it at home." "Kiddo." He set her down, keeping one hand on her shoulder protective. Present. Hannah saw it then, the living proof of everything she'd researched. This wasn't performance. This was a man who'd rebuilt his entire life around being fully here for this one person. "I'm writing the article whether you cooperate or not," Hannah said quietly. "But I'd rather tell the truth with your input than without it." James looked at her for a long moment. "The truth is that I failed as a husband because I prioritized success over presence. I don't get to redeem that failure. What I get to do is not repeat it with my daughter. That's the whole story. But what you said at the summit about leadership, about seeing people as human, that came from somewhere. It came from learning hard lessons. It came from loss," James corrected. "From realizing too late what mattered. I don't want to be anyone's leadership guru. I don't want people holding me up as some example. I just want to live quietly with my daughter and not make the same mistakes twice." Emma tugged at his hand. "Dad, who's this?" "A reporter, Em. She's leaving now." Hannah knew she'd been dismissed, but she tried once more. "The forum next month. Are you really doing it?" "I don't know yet. If you do, people will dig into your past anyway. Wouldn't you rather the truth come from you? Wouldn't you rather the truth come from you?" James knelt beside Emma, checking her backpack zipper, his attention already shifting away from Hannah. "The truth is already out there for anyone willing to look. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just choosing what deserves my focus. And corporate media narratives don't make the list." He stood, took Emma's hand, and walked away without another word. Hannah watched them go, father and daughter, his whole world contained in her small hand in his larger one. She understood then why Victoria Ashcroft's encounter with James had rattled her so deeply. He'd achieved what countless executives spent fortunes chasing. He'd figured out what actually mattered and built his life around it. Consequences be damned. Back in her apartment, Hannah revised her article. She included the corporate history, the transformation, the loss. But she framed it differently than she'd originally planned. Not as an expose of who James had been, but as a meditation on what it cost to become who he was now. The headline wrote itself, "The Leader Who Quit. How Loss Taught One Man What Success Really Means." She scheduled it to publish the day before the Leadership Excellence Forum, giving James time to prepare for the scrutiny, but not enough time to back out. As she hit the schedule button, Hannah felt the weight of what she was doing. She was dragging a private man into public consciousness, exposing pain he'd worked hard to move beyond, all in service of a story she believed people needed to hear. She told herself it was journalism, that truth mattered, that James's transformation could inspire others trapped in the same systems he'd escaped. But late that night, unable to sleep, she wondered if she was any different from the corporate forces trying to use James for their own purposes. Different methods, same exploitation. Hannah stared at her ceiling. questioning for the first time in her career whether the right to tell a story meant it should be told, especially when the person at the center of it had chosen silence not from shame but from wisdom. The article was scheduled. The forum was announced. James Smith's quiet life was about to explode into public examination, and Hannah Clarke, investigative journalist, defender of truth, couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just become part of the problem instead of the solution. The Leadership Excellence Forum was 3 weeks away, and the infrastructure of spectacle was already being built. Kelleth Dromer, events director for the National Leadership Excellence Association, coordinated from a glass-walled office that overlooked the forum's venue, the prestigious Grandmont Conference Center, a gleaming structure of steel and ambition in the heart of the financial district. Her desk was covered with production schedules, media contracts, and sponsorship agreements. The forum had always been successful, but this year's registration numbers were unprecedented. The announced debate between Victoria Ashcroft and James Smith had captured something in the cultural zeitgeist, the collision between traditional corporate power and an emerging hunger for more human-centered leadership. Kelleth's phone rang constantly. Network News wanted media access. Corporate sponsors offered additional funding for prominent placement. Leadership podcasts requested exclusive interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the narrative. But Kelleth had a problem. James Smith wouldn't cooperate. He'd refused every interview request, declined coaching sessions, ignored preparation materials. He hadn't even confirmed his attendance despite the public announcement. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashcroft's team was in full production mode, speechwriters drafting talking points, presentation designers creating visual materials, communication strategists wargaming potential scenarios. The imbalance was glaring. Victoria would arrive armed with polished arguments and professional support. James would arrive, if he arrived at all, with nothing but whatever he decided to say in the moment. It would be a massacre. And while that might make for dramatic television, it wouldn't serve Kelleth's larger goal, using the forum to genuinely advance leadership thinking. She called Victoria directly, bypassing the communications team. "We need to talk about the format," Kelleth said. "Your team is treating this like a competition to win. That's not what this should be." Victoria's voice came through crisp and businesslike. "What did you have in mind?" "A genuine conversation. Not a debate where one person dominates, but a dialogue where both perspectives get equal weight and respectful consideration. James isn't preparing. If I show up prepared and he doesn't, that's his choice. Or it's him already demonstrating his philosophy that authenticity doesn't require preparation. That truth speaks for itself. If you bury him with professional presentation skills, you'll prove his point about corporate leadership valuing performance over substance." There was silence on the line. Kelleth pressed her advantage. "You said you wanted to understand what he understands. You can't do that by defeating him. You have to actually listen." Another pause, then Victoria said quietly, "You're right. Tell my team to scale back. I'll speak from experience, not from a script. Thank you." After hanging up, Kelleth sent an email to Victoria's communications team limiting their involvement. Then she turned to the harder problem, ensuring James actually showed up. She couldn't reach him directly. He'd blocked her number after the unauthorized announcement. But she had another option. She called Hannah Clarke, whose investigative piece on James was scheduled to publish tomorrow. "I need your help," Kelleth said. "James trusts you more than he trusts me." "James doesn't trust me at all," Hannah corrected. "But what do you need?" "Convince him the forum can be something other than exploitation. That it can be a genuine platform for the ideas he expressed at the summit." "Why would I do that?" "My job is reporting truth, not promoting events. Because if he doesn't show, the narrative becomes viral. Nobody backs down when challenged. If he does show, and it's a genuine conversation, The narrative becomes something that might actually change how people think about leadership. Hannah considered. What's in it for James? The chance to speak truth to an audience that desperately needs to hear it. And maybe, just maybe, the chance to influence systems that damage people the way they once damaged him. I'll think about it, Hannah said. Then hung up. In her apartment, Hannah pulled up her article, reading through it one more time. It was good journalism, well-researched, balanced, humanizing without being sentimental. But publishing it would force James's hand, drag his past into public scrutiny, whether he wanted it there or not. She thought about him kneeling beside Emma outside the school, his entire focus on checking her backpack, his priority so clear it didn't need stating. Hannah made a decision. She called Kelleth back. I'll hold the article until after the forum, Hannah said. But only if you guarantee the format will be genuinely balanced, that it won't be designed to make James look foolish. You have my word. Equal time, respectful moderation, no gotcha questions. And I want media credentials. Uncovering this, and if I see it turning into a circus, I'll publish my piece mid-event and expose exactly what's happening. Deal. Meanwhile, at Summit Heights, James was facing his own pressure. The HR ultimatum deadline had passed, and he'd refused to sign the disclaimer. Evelyn Thomas had been clear about the consequences, but she'd also been surprised when Anthony White, his supervisor, had walked into her office with a folder. Before you fire James, Anthony had said, you should know that every member of the facilities team has signed a petition. If he goes, we all request transfer to other departments or other companies. We'd rather work somewhere that values integrity over corporate convenience. Evelyn had stared at the petition, 23 signatures, representing the entire maintenance and facilities staff. This is highly irregular, she'd said. So is threatening to fire someone for speaking honestly, Anthony had countered. James didn't violate any policy. He didn't disclose confidential information. He answered questions at a company event. If that's grounds for termination, then this company's values are even more hollow than I thought. The petition now sat on the desk of Summit Heights General Counsel, who was trying to determine if mass resignations over a personnel decision created legal liability. The answer was probably no, but the optics were terrible. James knew none of this. He'd simply continued showing up for work, doing his job, picking up Emma on time. When Evelyn had called him back to HR to inform him that they were tabling the discussion, pending further review, he just nodded and returned to fixing a flickering light in the stairwell. But the world outside Summit Heights wasn't tabling anything. The forum loomed, and with it the expectation that James would either validate or betray the message that had resonated with millions. One evening, as James helped Emma with math homework at their kitchen table, his phone rang. Unknown number, but something made him answer. Mr. Smith? This is Amelia Moore. I was in the audience at the summit. Okay, James said carefully. I'm a middle manager at a tech company. 50 people on my team. After hearing you speak, I started asking them about their lives. Really asking, not just surface questions. I learned that 3 of them were dealing with serious family health crises. 2 were struggling with childcare that made our meeting schedules impossible. 1 was caring for an aging parent. James waited, unsure where this was going. I changed how we operate, Amelia continued, her voice emotional. Flexible hours, genuine family leave, meetings scheduled around people's lives instead of just productivity. And you know what happened? Our output increased. Not because people are working more hours, but because they're working with less stress and more loyalty. That's great, James said. But why are you telling me? Because you're considering not doing the forum. I've been following the news. And I need you to know that what you said mattered. It changed how I lead, and that changed 50 people's lives. If you speak at the forum, it could change thousands more. After she hung up, James sat staring at his phone. Emma looked up from her homework. Who was that? Someone who thinks I should do something I don't want to do. Why don't you want to? James thought about how to explain it. Because when you speak in front of lots of people, they sometimes hear what they want to hear instead of what you actually said. And then they expect you to be something you're not. Emma chewed on her pencil, considering. But if you don't say it, they might never hear it at all, right? Right. So you have to decide if the risk of them hearing it wrong is bigger than the risk of them never hearing it. James smiled despite himself. When did you get so wise? I learned from you, Dad. You always say doing the right thing is usually the hard thing. That night, after Emma was asleep, James pulled out his phone and navigated to the forum's website. The promotional material showed Victoria's professional headshot, alongside a casual photo of him from the summit, the contrast intentional. The narrative already written, he thought about Amelia Moore and her 50 employees whose lives had changed. He thought about the woman at the bus stop who said her supervisor had started listening. He thought about all the people trapped in systems that valued performance over humanity, the way he'd once been trapped. And he thought about Emma, watching her father navigate whether to speak truth or stay silent when speaking carried risk. James opened his email and typed a message to Khalith Dromer. I'll participate in the forum, but I'm not debating or competing. I'm just answering questions honestly. If that's enough, I'm in. If you need more than that, find someone else. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came within minutes. That's more than enough. Thank you. James closed his laptop and sat in the quiet of his small apartment, knowing he'd just agreed to walk into a spotlight he'd spent 3 years avoiding. But Emma was right. The risk of staying silent had become greater than the risk of speaking. Now he just had to figure out how to protect what mattered while offering truth to a world that desperately needed it, but might not be ready to receive it. The forum was 3 weeks away. The stage was being built. The narrative was forming. And James Smith, maintenance worker and single father, was about to discover whether integrity could survive translation into spectacle, or whether the machinery of modern media would grind his truth into just another viral moment. Forgotten as quickly as it had arrived, the Grandmont Conference Center hummed with anticipation on the morning of November 15th. Outside, news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Inside, 1,200 registered attendees filled the main auditorium. Corporate executives, leadership consultants, business journalists, and curious observers drawn by weeks of promotional build-up. James arrived early with Emma, who had the day off from school. He'd arranged for her to wait in a private room with activities and supervision, close enough that he could reach her quickly if needed. She hugged him before he left for the green room. Just be yourself, Dad, she said simply. Victoria was already there, reviewing notes despite her promise to speak authentically. When James entered, she looked up, and something passed between them, not hostility, but mutual recognition of what they were about to attempt. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. The format was simple. Khalith would moderate, asking questions about leadership philosophy, organizational culture, and human-centered management. Each would respond, then they'd dialogue. No winner, no loser, just conversation. The lights dimmed as they walked on stage to thunderous applause. James felt the weight of 1,200 pairs of eyes, the cameras broadcasting to thousands more online. His work coveralls had been replaced by simple khakis and a button-down shirt, presentable but not corporate. Emma's choice from their limited wardrobe. Khalith opened with background, establishing context. Then the first question, what does leadership mean to you? Victoria spoke first, her voice carrying years of practiced authority. Leadership is the responsibility to create vision, establish direction, and mobilize resources toward achieving extraordinary outcomes. It requires clarity, decisiveness, and the strength to make difficult choices. James waited a beat after she finished. Leadership is showing up for people when it matters, especially when it's inconvenient. It's remembering that every person you lead is someone's entire world. The contrast was immediate, stark. Victoria's definition was organizational, strategic. James's was human, relational. The questions continued, each one revealing deeper philosophical divides. On accountability, Victoria emphasized metrics and performance standards. James talked about creating environments where people could admit mistakes without fear. On decision-making, Victoria championed speed and authority. James advocated for inclusion and patience, but something unexpected began happening. Instead of debating, they started building on each other's ideas. Victoria would offer a framework, and James would add the human dimension. James would share a principle, and Victoria would explore how to scale it organizationally. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were witnessing not conflict but genuine dialogue. Then, Khalif asked the question that changed everything. What have you each sacrificed for your approach to leadership? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. I sacrificed relationships, marriages, connection with my daughters, friendships. I told myself it was necessary, that leadership required singular focus. Now I'm not sure that was true or just easier than being vulnerable. James spoke quietly. I sacrificed career advancement, financial security, and professional respect. But I gained something more valuable: presence with the person who needs me most. The sacrifice wasn't giving up success. It was admitting that what I'd been calling success was actually just achievement, and they're not the same thing. The auditorium went silent. Even the cameras seemed to still. Victoria turned to James directly, abandoning the moderated format. How do you live without regret? I'm haunted by what I've lost while building what I thought mattered. I'm haunted too, James admitted. By the years I wasted optimizing systems instead of cherishing my wife. I can't undo that. But I can honor her memory by being for our daughter what I failed to be for her. Not perfect, just present. Tears glistened in Victoria's eyes, visible on the massive screens flanking the stage. This wasn't corporate theater anymore. It was confession, witnessed by thousands. The conversation deepened, both of them speaking with raw honesty about loneliness, fear, the cost of choices made and not made. The audience sat transfixed, watching two people from opposite ends of the success spectrum, discovering common ground in shared humanity. When Khalif finally called time, neither wanted to stop. The applause that followed wasn't polite or performative, was the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it. The forum should have ended there, with genuine dialogue and mutual respect. But 15 minutes into the networking reception, everything collapsed. Derek Castellan, the leadership consultant who had challenged James at the summit, approached the stage where Victoria and James were still talking with attendees. His face was flushed, his movements aggressive. This was beautiful theater, Derek announced loudly enough to draw attention. But let's talk about reality. James, you're being held up as some leadership prophet, but your actual track record tells a different story. James turned slowly. What are you talking about? I did some research. Derek pulled out his phone, projecting an image onto the nearby screen, a personnel file from Harman Industrial Supply. Your last year in management, your team had 47% turnover. 47%. You drove people away with impossible standards. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones appeared, capturing the confrontation. That's true, James said quietly. I was a terrible leader back then. That's exactly why I changed. Changed? Or failed and rebranded failure as wisdom? Derek's voice dripped with contempt. You couldn't hack it in real leadership, so you retreated to maintenance work and now lecture the rest of us about humanity. It's hypocrisy. Victoria stepped forward. Derek, that's enough. No, it's not. Derek turned to the crowd. We're all supposed to believe this fairy tale about transformation, but the truth is simpler. He quit. He couldn't handle the pressure of real leadership and created a philosophical justification for giving up. James felt the familiar weight of shame. The memories of people he'd pushed too hard, dehumanized in service of metrics. Derek wasn't wrong about the facts, only about what they meant. Before James could respond, Hannah Clark's voice cut through from the back. "You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about the whole truth." She strode forward, holding a tablet. "I've been investigating James's background. Yes, his management style was har. Yes, his management style was har." She strode forward, holding a tablet. "I've been investigating James's background. Yes, his management style was harsh. But do you know what happened after his wife died? He personally contacted every person he'd ever fired or driven away. Apologized. Offered references. Networking help. Genuine amends." Derek scoffed. "Guilt doesn't erase damage." "No, but accountability does mean something," Hannah countered. She displayed documents on the screen, emails from James's past, letters of reference he'd written, LinkedIn recommendations he'd provided to people he'd once dismissed. This man spent a year trying to repair harm he'd caused, asking nothing in return, Hannah continued. "That's not rebranding failure, that's genuine transformation." But Derek wasn't finished. He pulled up another image, a photo of Emma, taken outside Brookfield Elementary, captured by someone's telephoto lens without permission. "And let's talk about this sacrifice narrative. James lives in a modest apartment, works a modest job, plays the humble single father. But his wife had a life insurance policy worth $300,000. He's not struggling financially, he's choosing simplicity while living off her death." The crowd gasped. James felt something break inside him. Not from shame, but from fury at his daughter's privacy being violated. Her mother's memory weaponized. Victoria's voice turned to ice. "Remove that image immediately, or I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again. Truth hurts?" Derek shot back. "No," James said, his voice low and controlled. "But exploiting a deceased woman and photographing someone's young person without consent isn't truth, it's cruelty disguised as investigation." The room divided instantly. Some applauded James and Victoria's defense. Others muttered about transparency in public figures. The conversation that had been so honest moments ago fractured into tribal camps. Kelleth tried to restore order, but social media had already exploded. The image of Emma, the life insurance revelation, Derek's accusations, all of it trending within minutes. James pulled out his phone and called the supervisor watching Emma. "I'm coming to get her now. We're leaving." He walked off stage without another word, Victoria following close behind in the private room. Emma sat drawing, oblivious to the chaos outside. When James entered, she looked up with her bright smile. "How'd it go, Dad?" "Time to go home, sweetheart." Victoria knelt beside Emma. "Your father was very brave today. I hope you know that." Emma nodded seriously. "He's always brave." As they left through a service exit to avoid cameras, James's phone exploded with notifications. The narrative had shifted from inspiration to scandal, leadership gurus' hidden wealth. Did James Smith exploit his wife's death? The machinery of modern media had found the angle that sold, and truth was secondary to engagement. Hannah caught up with them in the parking garage. "James, I'm sorry. I tried to defend you, but you published details of my private life," James interrupted. "With good intentions, maybe, but without my consent. You're not different from Derek, you just have better rhetoric." Hannah's face fell. "I was trying to tell the truth. The truth is that my daughter's photo is now online because I tried to speak honestly about leadership. The truth is that everything I feared about stepping into public view just happened. The truth is that I should have stayed invisible." He buckled Emma into their car and drove away, leaving Hannah standing in the concrete garage with the weight of what her journalism had enabled. The apartment in Maplewood Heights felt smaller that night. the walls closing in as James sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the wreckage online. Emma was asleep, exhausted from a day she didn't fully understand. The internet had reduced their lives to clickbait: his wife's death, his financial situation, his daughter's face, all dissected by strangers who knew nothing about them. His phone rang. Victoria Ashcroft. "I'm holding a press conference tomorrow morning," she said without preamble. "I'm publicly condemning Derek's tactics and withdrawing my company's sponsorship from any event that platforms him. That won't undo what's out there. No, but it sends a message about what's acceptable." She paused. "James, I owe you an apology. I invited you into this world thinking it could handle nuance. I was wrong. You didn't photograph my daughter or weaponize my wife's memory. Derek did that. But I created the conditions that made it possible. I should have protected you better." The next morning, Victoria's press conference made headlines. She didn't just condemn Derek, she announced a complete restructuring of Ashcroft Global's leadership philosophy, implementing flexible schedules, genuine family leave, and human-centered management training. She cited James's influence directly. "I built an empire on dominance," Victoria said to the cameras. "James Smith reminded me that real leadership serves people, not systems. What happened to him yesterday was unconscionable, and I won't be silent about it." Within hours, something unexpected happened. The executives from the forum began posting their own statements. Amelia Moore shared how changing her management style had transformed her team. Samuel Thompson admitted he'd told his employees about financial struggles, and they'd rallied with solutions. One by one, leaders stood up not to defend James, but to share how his message had changed their approach. Hannah Clark published her full investigative piece, but with a different framing than originally planned. The headline read, "When Truth Becomes Weaponized: How Media Exploitation Punishes Authenticity." She laid out everything: Derek's violations, the privacy breaches, the life insurance detail taken completely out of context. She owned her role in creating vulnerability through her earlier reporting. The tide began shifting. Not completely, not universally, but enough that the narrative started changing from scandal to backlash against exploitation. 3 months later, James stood in a community center in Maplewood Heights, facing 30 people seated in a circle. No stage, no cameras, no corporate sponsors. Just folding chairs and genuine curiosity. "Thank you for coming," he began simply. "This isn't about leadership theory or corporate strategy. It's just a conversation about how we show up for the people who depend on us." The group was diverse: small business owners, middle managers, teachers, nonprofit directors, even a few corporate executives who'd driven from the city. They met every other week, sharing challenges and supporting each other in trying to lead with humanity rather than just efficiency. Victoria attended sometimes, sitting in the circle like everyone else. She'd step back from day-to-day operations at Ashcroft Global, appointing new leadership committed to the cultural transformation she'd begun. Her daughters were speaking to her again, cautiously rebuilding what had been broken. Hannah wrote about the group occasionally, but only with permission, focusing on principles rather than personalities. She'd learned the difference between exposing truth and exploiting it. Emma flourished, her science project earning recognition at the school fair. She knew her father had spoken to important people about important things, but mostly she knew he still picked her up every day at 3:15, helped with homework, and tucked her in every night. One evening, as James walked home from the community center with Emma, she asked, "Dad, are you happy you did the forum thing?" James thought carefully. "I'm happy I tried to speak truth, even though it got messy. Sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing." Did it help people? Some people, yes. Not everyone, but some. Then it was worth it, Emma said with the simple clarity that had guided him all along. James squeezed her hand, realizing she was right. He couldn't control how others used his story, but he could control whether he lived it authentically. The forum had cost him privacy and peace, but it had also reached people trapped in systems that devalued humanity. The viral moment faded, as all viral moments do. The headlines moved on. Derek Castellan faced professional consequences, but rebuilt elsewhere. The machinery of media found new stories to exploit. But the conversations, James started, continued quietly in community centers, break rooms, and kitchen tables where people wrestled with what it meant to lead with both strength and compassion. Victoria's transformation inspired other CEOs to question their assumptions. Hannah's journalism became more thoughtful about the cost of truth-telling. And James returned to what he'd always known, mattered most: being fully present for the one person whose world he was. On Sunday mornings, he and Emma made pancakes together, flour dusting the counter, laughter filling their small kitchen. No cameras captured it, no headlines celebrated it, no metrics measured it, but it was everything. True leadership, James had learned, wasn't about stages or spotlights. It was about the daily choice to see people as human beings worthy of dignity, presence, and love. Whether you led one person or 1,000, the principle was the same. And in choosing that truth, even when it cost him, James had found something more valuable than any empire: the peace of knowing that, when his daughter looked back on her upbringing, she would remember a father who had been there, fully and completely, through all of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.